Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, coming to you right here from the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, located in historic downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma. It's old Cody here, and as always, I have my co-host with me, Mr. Rodeo historian himself, Jimbo Snively. Hey, Jimbo, how you doing, and who do we have today?
Oh, Cody, it's just another great day in the Osage, man. We've got a real special lady with us today. We've got Becky Dickson. Becky was raised just a few miles east of here on a ranch near Lynn, Oklahoma. She is truly a groundbreaking broadcaster and began her career in KTUL-TV, Channel 8 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And after only 6 years, she was hired by ABC Sports and became the first woman to host a network sports show when she co-anchored Wide World of Sports with Frank Gifford. That's big time. Wide World of Sports was as big as it got back then.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, absolutely. She covered Super Bowls, Winter Olympics, college football, and horse racing's Triple Crown. She also hosted the Dallas Cowboys' Jerry Jones Show in 1989. Becky hosted the TV special called The Oklahomans, which ran for over 22 years and interviewed over 300 influential Oklahomans, including Reba, Garth Brooks, Mickey Mantle, Ree Drummond, and Ben Johnson. She received her state's highest honor when she was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame in 2016. Now, everybody knows who Becky is, but they might not remember who her dad was. Some people might not have known who her dad was. But her dad was 6 times NFR qualifier in the steer roping, Harry Lim, who roped in the very first national final steer roping and had the distinction of winning the first go-around at the first national finals. And nobody will ever beat that because there won't ever be another first one. And just one of the nicest guys you'll ever know. People around here should remember him well because he roped in so many Ben Johnsons. He roped in the finals here in 1963 and 1972. And her brother Charlie was 8 times national finalist in the steer roping. So quite an accomplished family for sure. And Becky, welcome to the Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here today and to walk around this museum and reconnect with so many memories. We have very deep roots in Pawhuska, as you said, because my dad and Charlie both roped here so many years. And all spring long, we would gear toward the Ben Johnson steer roping. That was the first big steer roping of the year. So all spring, that was our entire focus. We worked on the ranch all day, other than going to school, which we did do that as well, even though we really didn't want to go to school. We wanted to stay home on the ranch. But at night, every night, we'd go to the roping pen and practice roping. And I was a pretty good shoot girl. They didn't let me rope very often.
Shoot help.
Shoot help.
It's pretty hard to get fired from the shoot help duty, Jimbo.
Right. Yeah, because they can't get anybody else.
You know, you guys got something in common. So, did you know your dad won the first go-round at the first NFR? But Jimbo's dad, he worked the chute at that roping that.
Oh, wow. Well, of course, your grandfather was probably roping then, right?
Yeah, he won the first one.
Oh,
Yeah, he won the average.
Oh, I have really wonderful memories of the entire Snively family, your Uncle Joe and your grandfather Jim. And one of the memories I have of the Snively's in Pawhuska, other than the rodeo and roping arena, was every Sunday of the Ben Johnson steer roping, we would go to Mass first. We'd come over here, go to Mass, and then go to the steer roping. My dad was a devout Catholic, never missed Mass. And there in the pews would be Jim and Joe, who were getting ready to rope too. And you could always tell when the ropers were going to communion. You could hear their spurs jingling.
Right.
So that's a special memory.
I remember being an altar boy back then, and I was back there before where they come in with Father getting ready, and your dad walked in, and he knew Father. And they spoke and shook hands.
We came every year, it seems. It's such a beautiful church.
What all rodeos did you travel around with your dad to growing up?
Well, we
That
always
stick out in your
started
mind?
with the Ben Johnson, and then there was Claremore. Not every rodeo had or
Steer roping,
continues
right.
to have steer roping. Claremore, Lenapaw, the cowboy capital of the world, my hometown, and where I went to high school. We had a rodeo that began during my childhood. So that was 4th of July, I think. So Lenapaw. And then the other really big one was Cheyenne. That was always a big trip for us. And we would drive. Of course, my dad always wanted to work all day on the ranch, so we never drove during the day. We never took vacations like normal other families did. But we would drive all night. And so he could work at the ranch all day. But I have so many great memories of the Cheyenne Rodeo. And one of our family, probably most special family friends at Cheyenne with the McIntyres, Reba and Peg and Alice and Susie. Clark McIntyre was a steer roper at the time, and so we always stayed at the same hotel. And at night, the McIntyre kids would sing and entertain everyone in the lobby, and they'd sing a cappella. I always remember "Jesus Loves Me" and "Don't Fence Me In" were two of their favorites. So that's another special memory. Miles City, Montana, I remember being there one time. Now, my dad always roped at Pendleton, but that was such a far trip, and it was in September when we were in school, so I never got to go to that, but I know he always did that. And Laramie, Wyoming, I remember he won that one year. We still have a nice Western suitcase that he won with that event. But one memory I have of being in Montana, of course, that was a really far trip for us. And Charlie, my oldest brother, stayed home on the ranch to run the ranch. And my brother Dan, my middle brother, and I went with my dad to Montana. And I think there was also a roping that year in South Dakota, maybe Rapid City or somewhere like that. But it was a long way home, and my dad was ready to get home, and we were all tired, and he was going to drive straight through. Well, the problem was I was only 15, and Dan's younger, so my dad was the only driver. So we got somewhere in Kansas, and he said, "Move over here by me and put your foot on the gas. My foot's numb from driving." And we came on home like that. So those were some of my a lot of great memories.
A lot of rodeo kids got to learn how to drive up in Kansas and Nebraska where there wasn't any traffic.
Anyone else.
You know,
and pretty flat and straight.
Right. So that's funny.
And there's a lot of rodeo kids out there that come from rodeo families. Their vacation every year. They didn't go on typical vacations. No. I didn't grow up, and she said she didn't either. But Cheyenne Frontier Days was a vacation for me and my sister and my mom. We'd always make a family deal out of it. Of course, about the time we hit there, I'd shoot straight to the carnival, Jimbo.
Right.
I was hanging out at the carnival and trade show all day over there at Cheyenne. And then later in life, they'd let contestants or family of contestants in the museum for free. So I was either at the carnival or the museum or under the bleachers, roping the dummy or something there at Cheyenne. I got some great memories, and I think that there's a lot of rodeo kids that have a lot of great memories from Cheyenne also.
Be fun to have a reunion sometime. I'd like to talk to some of those friends.
Did your mom travel with you?
Not as much. There are 5 children in my family, and she always seemed to have younger kids at home. She did occasionally. She would go. She liked to go to Cheyenne.
Right.
And, she had some great friends, other wives. Shirley Webster Schultz's wife, Jackie McIntyre.
Right.
Your families, the women in your family. So it was, these were families.
Right.
And we were all great friends, and we would, in our family, so look forward to the summers because, the winters could get kind of long on the ranch.
Sure.
And we really look forward to summer and spring when we could go to the roping pen every night, and it was our entertainment.
Right, sure. Rita, I asked about your mom. Joe said he could remember the one time he remembered your mom at a roping was at Ada, and that has to be a long time ago because Ada hasn't had a roping in a long time. But your dad was out in the arena with Charlie and Dan, and they were quite a ways out in the arena. They were too far to suit your mom because the bronc riding was going on.
Oh.
And she got Joe's attention. He was close enough she could get his attention. You tell Harry to get those kids closer to that fence.
I'm glad to hear that story. I hadn't heard that. Well, Ada, that was another. And then I forgot to mention the McAllister State Prison Rodeo.
Sure.
We would always do that. That was around Labor Day, I think.
September. Yeah.
Anyway.
But that was funny.
I got a lot of good memories from that McAllister Prison Rodeo, too. What always sticks up in my mind about that particular place is up in the corner they had that big chain link area with the razor wire around the top that they'd stick all the prisoners that were watching the rodeo, not competing in the rodeo. They'd all watch up there. And then the other corner of the big stadium they have there, they have another big chain link cage, and they had the prison rodeo band up there playing.
Right.
So it was
They were a great band. I
very, very interesting.
They went to other places too.
I do
They
remember
traveled
that.
around to the other rodeos in the state.
Another friend that we always enjoyed, who announced almost all the steer ropings, of course, is Clem McSpadden.
Sure.
And I stayed close to Clem right up until his death, and I was interviewed for the book about him, so I got to give a few quotes about our special friend. He always called my dad, I don't know why, but he always called my dad the senator. Of course, Clem was the politician, not my dad, but he always called my dad senator.
Yeah, that's funny. Huh.
Miss Dixon, what first got you interested in being a sports broadcaster?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Especially being a girl at the time that you started doing it and things. It's sounds like a very interesting time in your life to me.
Well, there were a lot of women at the time entering the broadcasting field. Almost, all of them were going into news and broadcasting, and it was kind of the chicken and the egg. Well, you can't get a job because you don't have any experience, but you don't have any experience because you haven't had a job. So it was one of those things. So I knew I felt like I needed a special niche. And I went up to Channel 8. I knew Chris Lincoln, who was the sports director at the time, and I literally talked my way into a job. And James Lake was the owner of our station at the time, and he was such an innovator, the most creative, probably, broadcast owner I ever worked for. And so they took a chance on me, and it worked out better well for both of us. At first, they wanted me to cover just women's sports. Okay, you'll do women's softball or women's this and that.
Right.
So I had to gain their confidence
Sure.
before they sent me on some of the bigger sports. The same at ABC, probably, you could say. But
Right. Well, you played sports. I mean, I read somewhere that you might have hit 41 free throws in a row. Was that in one game?
yes.
Golly.
Yes, and driving up here, I thought of all the places along the way that I had played basketball.
Right.
Ramona,
Yeah.
Oshaleta. Did Barnstall have a team? That might have been too big for us. I can't remember.
Yeah, they had a team, but it may have been
It was
out of your class, probably.
probably out of our class. I can't remember what we were, at Lenapaw. But yes, I have a lot of memories, and those, that's kind of a far way for us to come on the bus for a basketball game. But I did play basketball. My mother was a great basketball player at Lenapaw. Her team went to the state championship, so she kind of moved me into that sport. But other than that, I used to like to play tennis, but no, I really wanted to be a barrel racer when I was a young girl. That was my ambition.
Most rodeo girls do,
most rodeo
it's just
girls
natural.
did. And it was the world I knew, and I really didn't have ambitions for a world outside that.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly how that transition came along, but I said when I accepted my honor at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, I said, I grew up on a ranch 15 miles from town. The closest neighbor was my grandmother, and she was 3 miles away on the same ranch. So I went from a very narrow window on the world to the wide world of sports, and that was a big transition for me.
I wondered about that. How do you go from Lenapaw High School to New York City?
I guess just one step at a time.
Yeah, I mean, that's all it can be.
It happened pretty fast. So I really didn't have a lot of time to think about it. And when ABC offered me a job, at first it was just to do some of their events, and I thought, well, this will be great. I can stay in Tulsa, where my daughter was in school, and my son was younger, and I won't have to move, but I'll just go to these events every weekend, and I can keep my family intact here. Well, a couple months later, the president of ABC Sports called me in and said, we want you to co-host Wide World of Sports with Frank, so you've got to move to New York. So that, I didn't really have time to think about it. and it wasn't an offer you said no to. So.
Oh no, absolutely. That like I say, they were the biggest thing going in sports at that time. That's before ESPN or any of that.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
wide world of sports. You know what throws a little lightning bolt in my head, Jimbo? And I want to ask if you ever covered one of these. Evel Knievel jumps.
I didn't cover one, but I remember them.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
we had all kinds. I did grow up watching Wide World of Sports with my grandmother. She liked to watch it because she liked figure skating. I remember she liked that. Gymnastics. You know, we had a lot of women's sports. And I think that's why they wanted to add. Now, before Frank and I hosted Wide World, it was Jim McKay, who
sure.
was, of course, a legend in the industry, but he was semi-retiring at that time and wanted to just he was a big horse racing
Right.
fan and owned thoroughbred horses. So I think they wanted to add a woman to appeal to the women's audience.
You know, Wide World Sports, they used to put on a few rodeos every now and then, too.
Cheyenne Rodeo, yes.
Yeah, they did that.
I was on the broadcast for a couple of rodeos at Channel 8. I think the IFR was in Tulsa at the time, and then at the National Finals Rodeo in Oklahoma City, one of the first, well, I guess it would have been when I was in high school, Clem was kind of in charge of the production and asked me to carry the Oklahoma flag at the beginning of the rodeo. So Miss Rodeo America carried the American flag and I carried the Oklahoma flag. So I had a lot of fun doing that and got to stay in Oklahoma City and do that for 10 days or whatever. So that's another fun memory. My mom did come with me to that because it's a long time for my dad to stay away from the ranch.
Right. Was your dad raised over there?
Okay, my dad, when he married my mom, was a 19-year-old farm boy from Liberty, Kansas.
Okay.
He knew nothing. I won't say nothing, but he didn't know all that much about running a large
Right.
ranch. My mother was a Lowry, and there were 4 brothers that, with their father, established the Lowry Ranch in Nowata County. Out of those 4 brothers, surprisingly, only 2 children were born, my mother and her sister. So they inherited the ranch. My grandfather died in his 40s at a young age. So my dad, stepped into this role. There were no other men in
Right.
our family at the time to run the ranch. But I will tell you, he learned very quickly, and he was only too happy to impart all of the lessons he learned to his children and his many hired hands who came along. He was very good at what he did.
Right. I bet he was.
He was very good.
How did he get interested in steer roping?
Lowry Ranch, man.
Well, I get
Well,
it. I get it.
well, yes, probably. There. I don't know the exact answer to that question. I don't know. I'm sure, just being around that part of the country,
Right, sure.
and seeing other ropers. I don't know who. I don't remember. I don't remember before he was roping steer, so
Right.
it's hard for me to remember.
Right.
But I remember all of his great friends, and we always had guys showing up at the ranch.
Yeah.
If there was a rodeo nearby,
Right.
they would come stay with us. And one of the main reasons was not only did they know they'd get to practice roping every night at our arena, but they would enjoy my mother's cooking.
Oh, I bet.
Okay, so she was the pioneer woman before Ree, and Ree's
Right.
a very good friend of mine.
Right.
She did my introduction at the Hall of Fame. But my mother was wonderful cook and loved the more cowboys that showed up for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the better she liked it. So,
I remember when I was a little kid, your dad I guess we knew he was coming, but I was just a little kid and didn't know it. And he just showed up with, I think Charlie had 2 or 3 practice steers and a horse in the trailer and just stayed 2 or 3 days and roped with Jim, my grandpa. He was really neat. But I'll say this about your dad. Wherever I saw him, he always had time to shake my hand and talk to me like a grown-up, and that made a big impression on me. He was really a nice man.
he was a one of a kind, and for those who knew him really well, they'll know what I mean by that. He and my mother died together 16 years ago this month in a car accident, and close to 800 or 900 people came to the funeral. Many of them were his former ranch hands, and to a person, they all said to us, it was by far the hardest job. Your dad would yell at me. My dad could he would let you know if you were doing something
Right.
incorrectly,
Right.
according to his book. But I loved that man so much, and I learned more from him than anyone I've ever. They they adored him, even though he was very hard.
Yeah.
And I said, well, being his daughter was much the same.
Right. Well, I never saw that side of him because he was all,
No.
but he was really one of the nicest guys. And like I said, the best looking steer roper of all of them, for sure.
Well, he expected him to read his mind, too.
Right.
You know what?
People
That's
do.
the
A lot of times I'm doing the same thing. I'm thinking something and telling them something, but I don't tell them everything they need to know that has to do with the job.
I can't tell you how many times my brothers and sister and I have said that. Well, he expects us to read his mind.
Right.
But we learned a lot from him, and to this day I can still open a gate with the best of them.
Yep,
But I have
yep.
to do it his way.
Yeah.
You know, she touched on that Lowry Ranch a little bit over there. But, you know, some of the greatest cowboys in history, rodeo cowboys, worked on that ranch, grew up around that ranch. I'm talking about Shote Webster. I'm talking about John D. Israel. I'm talking about a lot of people, Jimbo.
Yeah, they either lived there or passed through there, worked for Mr. Larry for a while or whatever,
You know, he was an innovator in the sport of roping, too, from what I've read. They said that man invented the roping dummy. They were the first. Shotes said that he's the first guy to ever build a dummy that you can sit there and practice from roping on the ground.
Yeah.
It's in Shote's book.
Right,
So,
right.
Well, we had, I don't know if he designed the one
and he
we
raised
had.
some great horses too. I
Yes,
mean,
yes.
something about this ranch, and you know, it's. He's one of the first guys to use training tools to train his horses, log his horses. He's one of the first guys in history to use a roping dummy to improve his roping skills. He was
Innovator.
Well, he's an innovator, and he was a teacher,
Right.
from what I've read.
Right.
There's a lot of guys that can do this. There's very few guys that can put into words and teach somebody else what they know about this sport and training horses, and a lot of little ins and outs about this sport that, you know, a lot of people probably wouldn't have known for a lot of years till they figured it out if he wouldn't have passed on some of that information to some of these fellas. So,
You mentioned your dad going to Pendleton. Y'all couldn't go because it was too far. Joe told me a funny story. Him and Sonny World and Mary Sue was with them. Were going to Pendleton one year, and they made it to Sidney, Nebraska. There was a rodeo there, but it was full. And of course, Sonny and Mary Sue, they needed 2 rooms. So Sonny and Mary Sue found a room at one motel, and Joe finally found a room at another motel. It was about 12 o'clock, Joe said, before he got to bed. He said about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, he heard somebody pounding on his door. Joe said, what in the heck? Who's there this time of day? He went up to, who is it? He said, it's Harry, let me in. And he couldn't get a room either, but he went through the register and found somebody he knew, and he woke him up and got him a room.
He has some great stories, and Charlie continues to tell some today about them being on the road together.
Yep.
One night they were with Randy Burchett. I think this was told at Randy's funeral, this story, and attributed to my dad, but they were going somewhere, and Charlie was with them, and it was the middle of the night, and there was, I don't know if there was no place to stay or no place to put their horses, so they finally went out to the fairgrounds, and they found some guy there, so they left their horses at the fairgrounds, and then they did find some place to go to sleep, I think, and my dad went to sleep, and then he all of a sudden sat up in bed and said, we didn't even know that guy. We don't know what he's doing with his horses. So they went back to the fairgrounds, and the guy was loading up their horses ready to take them. So they grabbed their horses and went on their way.
Well, it's a good thing you had that thought,
It's
isn't
a
it?
good thing. Yeah, somebody was speaking to him from above, I guess.
Yeah, must have.
Another story I tell a lot is during the winter, when we couldn't practice roping outside, oftentimes we would sit around in the house. I had 2 brothers right below me, and then a sister, and then a younger brother who was quite a bit younger. But my 2 older brothers and myself, so my dad would sit around and spear tie. Or at the time, they were also doing some team roping, and at that time, you know, they did tie-down team roping with a square knot.
Right.
So during this time, I joined the Campfire Girls, and my mother was the leader. And one day at one of our campfire meetings, they said, okay, girls, today we're going to learn how to tie a square knot. And so the other girls were going, okay, right over left, left over right. And I went up there and went, and tied my knot, and I was finished. I always thought that was a funny story.
Yep.
We had Johnny Joe Miller in the other day telling us all about tying the square knot.
Did they do that too?
Yep.
It's really special for me to be here. I wanted to talk a little bit about Ben Johnson. He was, you know, of course, when we were growing up, he was a movie star. and the only movie star that we knew, and so we really idolized him. And later, after I started my Oklahoman show, he was one of the first guests that I called and asked to be interviewed. And at the time, he had retired and was living in a retirement community in Arizona. So I flew out with my crew, and we went to his house and did the interview. And then he said, well, let's go riding. He said, I'll take you out to where I keep my horses. So we went out there and we got some video doing that, which was really nice. So we're riding around, and we hear this voice say, Ben. And I said, Ben, and I don't think Ben heard him at first. I said, Ben, somebody's looking for you. And he looked around. He said, oh, that's just Wilford. And it was Wilford Brimley. And so he came with us. They had just done some project together, but Wilford was living out there too. But Ben was a great storyteller. And you can imagine he had so many. He talked a lot about growing up and working, here in the Osage and what it meant to him. And, how do you go from the Osage to where he ended up? It's just kind of one of those things, right? Kind of like with me that just happens. But he was a great representative for the state of Oklahoma, and I was always so proud of him.
Those Oklahoma shows were really good.
Thank you.
I mean, we enjoyed them. We watched them. That was must-see TV when you had one of your specials.
Thank you. I think people talk a lot about my time at Wide World of Sports, but for me, the most fulfilling part of my career was when I came back to Oklahoma after ABC. I wanted to give something back to the state that had given so much to me, and I just felt like I had, been given such a great childhood and such a great foundation in life. And so I produced and developed this concept. And people would often say, "Oh, aren't you afraid you're going to run out of accomplished Oklahomans to interview?" And I said, no, look, because each year, somebody new would come along. Right. Jim Shoulders was another favorite of our family, and I went to Henrietta probably 10 years before he passed away, and we had a really nice visit. I got to interview him. But I mean, think about it. I could still be doing the show if I had enough energy.
Right. It was great.
What was it like interviewing Reba after you grew up together?
It was so much fun. I interviewed her twice for my Oklahoman show. The first time was in Kansas City, and she was with Vince Gill there. And it was right after her band had died in the plane crash. And so it was a really emotional time for her. I know she was really glad to see me, so I interviewed her backstage. And, part of what we talked about was obviously the emotion that she felt, and she was just so crushed, as you can imagine. Reba has a very big heart, as did everyone in her family. Then the second time was later, maybe 10 years later, in Houston, when she was getting ready for a big performance there. And she explained to me, she said, I have a job like anyone else, only my job is at night and not during the day. She had her own airline fleet, and so that she would leave home, maybe 4 o'clock, leave Nashville 4 o'clock in the afternoon, fly to her concert, and then fly back that night. So she really was gone maybe 10 hours. But I also want to say one other thing about Reba. The day of the funeral for my parents, when we came back to the ranch afterwards for a reception, and the phone was ringing, and one of the women that were inside helping prepare the food came out and said, Becky, there's a phone call for you. And I went in, and it was Reba. And she and her, I think both of her parents were still, yes, they were definitely both still alive then. They were on a cruise, an Alaskan cruise, and they had just landed in Seattle, and Clem McSpadden had called to tell them about my parents. And Reba called and just wanted to tell me how sorry she was, and that meant a lot to me. Sure. That she did that. And so it was great interviewing her. I told you the story about them singing at the hotel in Cheyenne. They all were equally as good as Reba. But she was the one that pursued the career, and of course she had a very, very special talent. But it was so much fun growing up with them, and we were all the same age. Like, the stair-step children in my family were the stair-step children in her family, until I have a brother that's 16 years younger than I am, Patrick, who's now at Carlsbad Caverns, is a park ranger. And when Clark found out that my mother was pregnant again, since all of our children matched up, he said, I better go home and see if Jackie has any news for me. But they stopped at 4. But anyway, so I have, there's myself, then Charlie, then my brother Dan, who's was a very good roper himself. And then Gina, my sister, lives in Texas with her family. And Patrick, the youngest, who's 16 years younger, is a park ranger.
What did your mom and dad think about your TV career?
It's interesting. They never talked about it a lot. If you remember, at that time, parents weren't the big cheerleaders, really, that they are today, I don't think. I think they were proud of me, but they didn't really talk about it a lot. But during the time of my Oklahomans show, my dad would often call me after a show and say he was proud of me. That meant a lot.
Sure.
My mother was more the kind that she would watch me on Wide World of Sports and say, your earrings were all wrong. And I would say, oh, but Mother, did you see that interview I did with Magic Johnson? Now, which one is he?
Right.
So maybe a scarf would have helped too.
Right.
So I think they were proud of me.
Oh, I'm sure they were, for sure.
But they were the most wonderful parents.
Right.
Do you know who else was a great Okie?
Who?
I saw him hanging up in the Oklahoma City airport one day, and I didn't know he was an Okie. Louis Lamar. Did you ever interview him?
I did not.
Gosh,
but I knew he was an
darn it.
Oklahoma.
That would have been a good one.
I didn't know it until you told me that.
That would, another great Okie right there. Mickey Mantle.
Mickey Mantle,
What was it like meeting a guy like that? I mean, if you were going to pick an iconic sports star in the world, you pick like Babe Ruth. Mickey Mantle's on that top 5 list, I would have to say, as far as all-time great people that just come to your mind. If you just say sports legend, for some reason, Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle comes straight to my mind.
He has such a great name, too, Mickey Mantle. It just has a ring to it, doesn't it? He was great. I interviewed him at his golf tournament, I guess in Joplin, I think was where it was. So I don't really remember the year. But he was a lot of fun, and he is a great storyteller. And he had really good stories to tell. He talked about how the day after the season was over, he went home, picked up his fishing pole, went back to Oklahoma, and never thought about baseball again. Never thought about sports, never thought about training or working out, anything.
And he still set all those records.
And he still set all those records. He got to New York after he'd been drafted by the Yankees, and he was staying in a hotel. I mean, you can imagine coming from where he did, all of a sudden being thrust, kind of like I was, in New York. And he looked around his hotel room, and he called his dad, and he said, I'm coming home, I'm not staying. I don't like this, I don't want to be here. And his dad, who probably, Mickey didn't say this, but likely maybe never been on an airplane before, flew up there and said, oh, no, you're not. You're going to stay here. And he did. But he said, if my dad hadn't come up here and made me stay, I would have been gone.
Yeah. He was raised poor, over there where he came from. And
he talked about also when he was a little leaguer playing in Commerce, I guess. There was a woman who lived behind the ballpark, and she would always put her apple pie out on the windowsill to cool, and he kept knocking her apple pie off the windowsill because he could hit it so far. So he was a very good storyteller, and he wasn't a perfect man. He was the first to tell you that. But he was a really good man, I felt. And he overcame his obstacles toward the end of his life. And I really enjoyed that interview. And like you said, he was probably one of the most legendary people I interviewed.
When you're on the wide world of sports, it says wide world. How many countries did you visit? And some of the... Can you name an interesting sport that we might not even know that much about?
Well, a lot of them, I was the studio host, so Frank and I didn't always go. Sometimes we would, one of us would go. I had an interesting experience at the World Gymnastics Championships. Now, there were other sports, I'm trying to think of some of the more unique ones, but, different kinds of wrestling. I never went to one of those, but there was like wrestling in Bulgaria. I would always pray that I wouldn't get snow jumping in Norway in January, which I did, was the sign that one time. And at the very last minute, they switched me to Chris Everett's tennis tournament in Fort Lauderdale. I was so thankful because I'd just come off the Olympics, which was very cold in Calgary.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, so getting back to the World Gymnastics Championship, it was in the Netherlands. And the Soviets were very, very good. The Soviet women and men were the best gymnasts in the world. But it was, they were Soviets. It was during, that time. It was a very highly charged political time. And it was right around the time that Nadia had defected. So they were very concerned that some of their gymnasts might defect. So we were not allowed to be in a room with them with our crew, and they always had to have a chaperone with them. We were not allowed to make eye contact with them. If I interviewed them, I had to look, in another direction. I think that might have been the first time I realized I wasn't in Lenape anymore, because I could just picture a KGB agent, lurking around in the corner ready to take me back. There were a lot of interesting international experiences like that. But that one, I don't know, that one kind of was a little bit frightening, because they were very, very stern with us.
They're filming that movie here, and some of the extras told me that the very first thing they said when they walk on the set, they're not allowed to look Leo or Robert De Niro in the eye. Isn't that crazy? So
I think
it's a lot like the Soviets over there at the movie set, I guess. So
I guess that's for different reasons.
I guess.
The production, somebody from the production crew a couple of years ago from Killers of the Flower Moon just showed up at the ranch, our ranch. And my grandmother's house, the one I was talking about who lived 3 miles from me, that was the original ranch house that my great-grandfather built. But it's a big, beautiful, white, turn-of-the-century house. And so they just showed up and said, we'd like to scout this house. We might want to use it for Killers of the Flower Moon. And they came twice, and my brother wasn't there, and I don't think my cousin wasn't there either, but one of the ranch foremen were. And so, of course, he didn't find out much information. But then we never heard from them again, so I assume they found a better location.
Yeah, or closer or something.
To Osage
Well, the
County.
last couple of years, they've had a couple different production crews look at it, and then now Apple TV has the production crew.
Right.
2 years ago, I think it was Paramount.
somebody
Paramount
else.
here, they had the rights to it. Now they have the distribution rights to it. So.
Yeah.
What an exciting time for Pawhuska, and I'm so happy to see all of the things that are happening here with what Ree has done. And
We love Ree here.
oh yes, well, Ree was another great interview I had.
How'd you get acquainted with her?
Okay, let's see, through Ranch Rodeo. So Charlie put together a ranch rodeo team for our ranch, and Neil Kotke, who owns Schultz, Webster's former place, Bogue Foreman, who I'm sure you guys know. Bogue worked for Neil, and so he was part of our rodeo team. So we had this really pretty good rodeo team. Some of our guys were getting a little older, but then Ladd and the Drummonds had their team, so we would see them at ranch rodeos. And then Ree said I called her to ask her to do an interview for my Oklahoman show, and she said, oh, I would love to. I used to watch you all the time when I grew up, was in high school in Bartlesville. So I went out to the ranch, trying to think when that was. That was not too long ago. And we have so much in common. She's a rancher by marriage. I was one by birth, but we had a lot in common and with our ranch rodeo teams. And my childhood was much like what you see on her TV show that her children have. That was kind of the life that we led, getting up at 5 in the morning to go work cattle, helping around the ranch all day. But anyway, so then when I was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, I got to choose who I wanted to introduce me. And I wanted an Oklahoman, I wanted a woman, and Ree and I have a lot in common, and so I asked her, and she did such a beautiful job, and I was really proud of to have her do my introduction. And then a couple of years later, I was emceeing the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and Ree was inducted, and Ladd did her introduction. So, and I got to introduce Ladd, so that was fun. But I'm so proud of everything she's done, and she will say, I'm not sure. it's entirely true, but she would say, she really didn't plan any of this. It's very organic. It just kind of evolved, which I think at first it certainly did. Now I think she's, become a very strategic businesswoman,
Sure.
and I'm really proud of all that she's done. And it seems like she's just created one thing after another, and then so many great things are happening in Pawhuska. I'm really happy to see this. I only wish my parents could see it. They would have.
Oh, yeah.
They would have loved to have seen all this.
She don't like the word empire, but when I walk into a big box store and I see her in the frozen food section, when I see her in the pet food section, when I see her in the toy section having her own Barbie doll, when I see her in the clothing section, when I see her in the pots and pans section, when I see her in the magazine section, when I see her in the book section,
I would call it an empire.
I'm going to have to say there's very, very few people alive, if any, that's in every section of the store.
You're
I
probably
think
right.
people really love the fact that Ree is self-deprecating. She can laugh at herself and make fun
Right.
of herself, whether it's living on the ranch or any of the other things. Her travels she has fun stories about that sometimes. But
she's very big, and a lot of people don't realize just how big this was. She's in the canned food section, the jar. She's got her own jars of stuff. I mean, you name it, I can keep going on for days and days. I think they have Ree and Rope and Lad toys I saw here a while. I'm serious. So she has her own Barbie doll. Princess Diana didn't have her own Barbie doll. There's a Pioneer Woman Barbie doll right over there in Ree's case right now. So to me, that's pretty big time right there.
That is.
Pretty darn big time. Olympics. What was it like to get the call that you're going to be calling part of that Olympics? And how many Olympics did you do?
Just one. Because right after that, ABC had done all the Olympics before I got there. And then we had the Calgary Olympics, and that was when I did. And then NBC took them over. It was, it's hard to believe, but it was a money-losing operation for ABC, and we had a new owner and new president of ABC, Dennis Swanson, who had taken over for Roone Arledge, and he said, I'm not going to lose that much money anymore. So he let the rights go to NBC, but we did. So I went to Calgary for those Olympics. It was very cold, it was very long, and it was very hard, but it was the Olympics, so it was also very exciting.
Didn't they have rodeo exhibition at that Olympics?
I think they did. I didn't go to that. And I hosted from lots of different sports, so I got to go to lots of different locations. One interesting story about that, I was with Tim McCarver, the baseball announcer, and our baseball and football guys did not like being at the Olympics. They wanted to be home where it was warmer. Tim wanted to go to spring training. Dan Deerdorf wanted to be home and at his restaurant, not at the Olympics where it was freezing cold. So Tim and I were doing announcing one of the skiing events on top of the mountain, and a snowcat was supposed to take us down. We didn't have cell phones. And so we were waiting around there for our snowcat to come, and all of a sudden we look around and we're the only ones on the mountain. Everybody's gone. So somehow communication had been lost, and we didn't have a way down, and it was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had to kind of slide down this huge downhill mountain. And all the way down there, Tim talked about spring training and how he couldn't wait to get out of there. But finally, we got to the bottom, but that was very precarious. Even though we didn't have the Olympics after that, we had all the Olympic trials, and that was really fun. So we got to do all the U.S. Olympic, which really to me was it was less stressful, and like for the Summer Olympics, we were always in warmer climates. But I did a lot of track and field. I did diving, swimming, gymnastics. I did a lot of gymnastics when I was at ABC. So even though I only had one Olympics experience, I had lots of Olympic trials under my belt. The Super Bowl was another great event. That I did the Super Bowl in San Diego, and I opened the show from an aircraft carrier to talk about what the soldiers were doing. This was the pregame show to talk about what the soldiers were doing, or the sailors were doing, to get ready for Super Bowl Sunday, and that was fun. And then we went all around the world to different reporters. Here's so-and-so over the Persian Gulf covering something. And they would do a report from what are people doing there and what are people doing south of the border in Tijuana. And then we showed a picture of commuters in China. And Keith Jackson said, and in China, they really don't give a damn, because nobody knew the Super Bowl was going on.
Right.
They were just still going back and forth to their work. I really want to say, too, what great people I got to work with in my career at ABC and at Channel 8. But Frank Gifford was such a gentleman, and I really enjoyed working with him. He and Kathy Lee had just gotten married at the time. So we got to know her, and Jim McKay, Al Michaels, Lynn Swan, Dan Deerdorf, Tim McCarver, like I mentioned, Peggy Fleming, Donna Deverona. A lot of the Olympic women athletes were on our broadcast team.
How about Bob Costas? You ever work with him?
No, he was NBC. He took over the Olympics after we left. I've met him, but I didn't work with him. Bob Greasy, I did football with. Keith Jackson, I mentioned. Dick Vermeil, who was the coach and did football with us. So.
She just casually mentions the Super Bowl, Jimbo. Almost every set of eyes in America was on her that day.
Right.
Talking about the Super Bowl going off. And I can only imagine, the national pride when you're up there at the Olympics. She's up there talking to the world, but, she's talking to Americans, letting all of us know how they did, There's a medal count, back when we had a lot of national pride, I would just, it's got to be a special feeling up there, I'm going to have to say.
It's a big deal, for sure.
I always tried to just look at the camera and think of just the camera because I didn't want to think of them.
Right.
All the people out there. It's funny, but speaking, like if I'm asked to make a speaking engagement, that makes me much more nervous than I ever was on television. I don't know why, but I don't do. I guess I do okay, but I don't really like public speaking.
Right.
When you were doing the Super Bowl, were they making the big Super Bowl commercials then?
Yes.
Was it such a big thing, or just was it starting to be a big thing, or
no,
it already was?
It already was. Yes. This was San Diego. It was John Elway and the Broncos, and Washington Redskins, and Doug Williams, who I had known because he played for the minor. What was the team in Tulsa, Oklahoma Outlaws? Remember, it was and so I knew him from Tulsa. I forget what they called the league. He was the first African American quarterback to win the Super Bowl. So that was a great experience. I'm trying to think who some of the other players were. We had a huge we would have like maybe 30 cameras between the pregame and the game. And today I'm sure they have even more. And we would have lots of former or current coaches would be on our broadcast team. I remember like Marty Schottenheimer, who just passed away, was one of them. I think he coached for Cleveland at the time, maybe Cincinnati. But it was quite a production. It was a huge production.
I can imagine.
And the Olympics even more so. And we did the international feed for the Olympics. So, for instance, Finland might bring their announcers over, but it was our production feed.
You came live so many times. Do you ever have a, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that on live TV moment?
Yes. I was in New Orleans at it was the Final Four, and Bobby Knight was the coach of Indiana. They were favored to win, and Kurt Gowdy Jr., my producer, sent me down there to do an interview, but Bobby wouldn't talk to anybody. He said, you're just going to have to make him do this, and you just go up to him and introduce yourself, tell him you're with me, and that my dad, Kurt Gowdy Sr., can't wait to take him fishing. Yep. He loves fishing, so I think he'll do the interview if you do that. So we went down there. There was this huge crowd at the press conference. Bobby was being his usual cantankerous self, wouldn't talk to anybody, he was being fussy. So I went up to him and did exactly what Kurt had told me, and sat him down. We did the interview, and there's another little story there that I won't go into. But anyway, afterwards, I did the open, and I got confused on the time, so I did the whole open thinking it was just a run-through on practice, but it was the whole open. But thankfully, I did it all right. But that was afterwards, I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder I didn't stop and say something. But it was a Sunday, and usually our show was on Saturday, so I got confused on the time, and they hadn't really made it clear to me.
Okay. That's your I can't believe it did that on live TV. Who are you talking to on live TV and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy or lady just said that to me on live TV? What comes up in your mind? Anything?
Not really. I remember at Channel 8 when I was filling in on the morning show one time, and there was Betty Boyd, I don't know if you remember her, was the host, and she was ill or something that day, and I filled in, and there was a woman who was doing some kind of a knitting exhibition, and I think I asked her how long she'd been knitting, and she said, I've been a hooker for years. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Right. You did the Jerry Jones show. I bet that was interesting.
That was pretty interesting. So that came about because...
he's still alive, isn't he?
Yeah,
oh, yes.
he's still
Okay. Just making, I'm just making sure.
He's
Yeah,
still very
yeah.
colorful. Jimmy Johnson was the coach, and Jimmy I knew from my time in Oklahoma and his time at Oklahoma State at Channel 8. And he called me, and I was in L.A. at the time, still with ABC, and he said, Becky, is there any way you could come help us and help with Jerry, because he knows nothing about television, and he says all these things that he shouldn't be saying, and we really need somebody to host his show. And I told him I'd try to see if you could do it. So I did, and it was the first year, and Jerry did say, I'm trying to think, I mean, you can probably remember some of the things he said.
He says what's ever on his mind, it seems
or something like that, yeah. So anyway, but I really enjoyed that experience, and he was great. He was great to work with, and I think we did some pretty good shows. And but he didn't think before he spoke, and he just spoke.
Yeah.
So I would try to ask the question and sometimes answer it for him too, I think. But the team was very bad that year. It was Troy's first year, and he was just so disheartened because of that.
Yeah, they just won one game, I think.
They won one
year.
game.
Yeah.
That's another good Okie, though.
Yes.
Troy.
I've
Troy
interviewed
Aikman, Henrietta, Oklahoma.
I've interviewed Troy a couple of times.
Who's the most historic person, in your opinion, you've interviewed? Historic person.
Historic? Well, you mentioned Mickey Mantle. Carl Albert is another one that comes to mind from Oklahoma. As far as athletes, Magic Johnson, Bo Jackson, John Elway.
All the greats.
Yeah. And people often ask, who is your favorite Oklahoman? And it's hard for me to answer because I like them all. And I will say this too, and a lot of these, when I interviewed them, they were at the height of their career and would have a lot of interview requests. But I didn't have anyone turn me down. I think they were all really proud to be from Oklahoma. I remember what Kristen Chenoweth said, our Broadway star. She said, being from Oklahoma in an audition always gave me an edge, kind of a uniqueness, because everybody else was from, the Northeast or the West Coast or maybe the South. But she said, but people would say, where are you from? And she would say, I'm from Oklahoma. And she said, I think it gave me an edge. And I think the people that I interviewed, and that was always one of the questions that I asked them, was about growing up in Oklahoma and what made them proud about being from here and how they wanted to be remembered. So.
Seems like a lot of Okies. We don't forget where we come from.
Right.
And I think that's
we stay humble people, no matter how big you get. We always remember our Oklahoma roots, and we're proud of them. Absolutely. I know a lot of people that's proud to be from here. I am.
Yep.
I'm proud she's from here, too.
For sure.
Jimbo, you got anything for Becky?
Well, just like to thank her for coming in, for sure, and talking about her dad. Just great memories. Those old steer ropers of that era, they were just such great people in their families, too. But don't know when this will be released, Cody, but today's date as we sit here and do this is June 10th. And Becky specifically picked June 10th to do this broadcast. So can you tell us what's significant about June 10th?
My dad would have been 90 today. And when you asked me if I would come to Pawhuska and do this, I said I would love to, but I'd like to ask if I could do it on June 10th, because today would have been my dad's 90th birthday. And I'm glad I can get through this without crying, because he meant so much to me, he and my mom both. And I learned so many lessons from both of them, and they gave me such a great foundation to take with me to do the things I was able to do. And I hope I've kept grounded and humbled, and I hope they were proud of me. They didn't always tell me, like I said, but I think they probably were.
I'm sure.
And I'm very close with my brothers and sister today. And, it was such a heartbreaking tragedy to lose them both so suddenly and at once, but it made us closer. And after they died, we heard so many stories of kindness that they had shown to other people. Oh, your parents did this for me, or your parents did that for me. And that always made us feel so good. So happy birthday to my dad.
Happy birthday, Harry, and I'll never let anyone forget that you won the first go-round at the first National Final Steer Open, because there's only one first ever, Jimbo.
That's right.
There's only one first, and he did it. He did it. Becky, we always finish off asking our person to give a little bit of advice, but, I got two little girls at home, 10 and 11. And, we're trying to teach these girls not to settle for anything in life. And you've done a lot of things that women don't typically do. What kind of advice do you have for some up-and-coming young girls coming up in the world? Any type of advice, Well,
don't let anyone ever tell you can't do something. And today, that's even more apparent than ever when we see all of the things that women are doing today. But be willing to work hard. There's really no way around that. I've worked very hard in my career, and if you think you can do a good job by not working hard, you're probably wrong, and it's probably going to be apparent pretty quickly. But I would say always be kind to others. I hope I've left a good footprint wherever I've been, and I tell my kids that. I said, I don't care what happens, you leave a good footprint. And I think, as far as I know, they followed that pretty well. But I would say that to work hard, be kind, do good for others, and I think good things will happen to you. It's not it's not really a scientific formula that I have. It's just things that have helped me along the way.
Well, if you got kids out there or anybody out there, please listen to her advice, because a lot of people don't think of these things until it's too late. What I should have done or how I should have did it. Listen to her right now. This lady, she's done everything. She's worked the biggest events in the world, period. She's talking about the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the Final Four. Casually. I mean, these are the biggest events on the world stage, Jimbo.
Absolutely.
None bigger. If you were trying to think of the world's biggest events, those three would come to mind.
Right.
Period.
For sure.
And she's done way more than that. Talked to the biggest people in the world. So I highly, highly suggest everyone listens to any advice Becky has to say.
And one more thing. When you're talking about that, I've talked to some of the biggest people in the world. Treat everybody the same.
Yep. It's good advice.
Treat people right, and you get what you put in.
Yes. Well, thank you both. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming, for sure.
Well, we sure appreciate you coming in. And you can learn a lot about what we talked about right here in the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum. And today was just a special day, Jimbo.
It sure was.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks, Jimbo.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody next week right here on Cowboys of the Osage podcast broadcast. See everybody later.